Good morning. My name is Megan Edwards of Focus Communications, and today we're excited to get a new company introduction from Quebec Nickel, which trades on the Canadian Stock Exchange under the symbol QNI. And joining us today is Quebec Nickel CEO and Director David Patterson. David, thank you so much for joining me today.
A pleasure joining you, Megan. Thank you very much for having me on.
So for those that are new to the Quebec Nickel story, could you please give us a high-level overview of the company and maybe discuss the background of the Ducros project?
Okay, so a great question to start off. To be able to tell about the background of Ducros, I got to tell a little about the background of me. I've been in the business for 4 decades. I've run a number of nickel exploration companies. I've loved nickel. It's one of those rare metals that is difficult to find. It is highly valued. And so, I was out of the business because of COVID. I resigned from most of my directorships and, more or less watching the metal complex and seeing what metals were doing. And I saw that nickel was a laggard. And I'm thinking, you can't run a battery plant without nickel. You can't drive a Tesla without nickel. And I always loved nickel. I reached out to a friend of mine that had a nickel project, Glenn Mullen. And Glenn's on our advisory board right now. Glenn had a project that he drilled, and it was in the Abitibi. They ended up with what I consider very significant drill results. And it was 12, 13 years ago when they did this. The nickel project sat on the back burner of their company. Their company name is Golden Valley. So they're looking for gold royalties, not looking for nickel. I reached out to Glenn, like to do this deal, made him an offer. We put it together. Glenn's company owns 3.5 million shares of Quebec Nickel and has an overriding royalty across the property of 1.5%. No work commitment, no amount of money changed hands. He got shares and we got his property. But the first time I was able to go to the property was in 2021 because of COVID. And when I stood on the outcrop, and we call this outcrop the Fortin Sill. And I'm standing there and I'm thinking about all the experiences I've had in the nickel business over 30-something years. And I'm thinking, this is incredible. I am standing 200 meters off a major highway in Quebec. Power lines nearby, railway nearby, 2 little towns on either side of this property. And no one has stopped to look at this for nickel. They've walked across this property many times looking for gold, but no one stopped and looked for nickel. On the outcrop, I found rocks that graded in excess of 1% nickel, copper, cobalt combined, and I elevated platinum, palladium, and gold. And this is something I had not seen in the Abitibi. Talking to my friends in the business, they said the Abitibi is where nickel companies go to die. You do not see nickel in sulfides. This is what's important here, I think, the distinction. That what we're seeing on the Fortin is nickel and sulfides. In the Abitibi, more than likely you're going to see what's called nickel and silicates. And they are very difficult to produce a nickel product from. It's one of the reasons why the LME, which is the London Metal Exchange, does not trade any other nickel contract but Class 1 nickel. Class 1 nickel comes from nickel sulfides. So just like what I thought we had on this property. Well, standing there, knowing that the last time I stood on an outcrop of a nickel exposure, it was about the size of a dining room table. And here I'm on an outcrop the size of a battleship. And I'm thinking, I'm 200 meters away. I can hear the road. Why hasn't this been explored in detail for nickel? We did our sampling. I asked our geologist, clean this off. I want to see what we have. We sampled it over the whole outcrop, and it was just so surprising to see the whole thing was what I would consider payable metals. whether it's in elevated nickel, copper, cobalt, or where we see the platinum, palladium, gold. One sample we had was almost 3 grams per ton platinum, palladium, and gold. And platinum is, I think it's $2,000 an ounce US. Palladium is, I might have that backwards. Palladium is 2,000, platinum is 1,000, and gold is, call it $1,800. This is very valuable rock that's been overlooked. So this was what gave us the impetus to go raise around $7 million in October, November of 2021. And the idea of that raise was to get on the VTEM, figure out what it is, go from the known to the unknown. And in a couple of minutes, I'll go through the presentation. I'll show you what I mean by going from the known to the unknown. But I'm standing there looking at something that I did not think I would see. And one of our advisors said, you know, what you have here is a unicorn. What you're looking at in the grades, how it's exposed, the way this rock has formed, all of this is completely unique to the Abitibi. So within the Abitibi, we have something that doesn't look like anything else in the Abitibi. I've heard people compare it to Raglan, to the Manitoba Nickel Belt, the way that possibly the deposits formed, or perhaps one of the models that come out of South Africa or Australia. So truly something that no one else has actually seen. And being able to tell people that you have a unicorn. And why I feel I can say that is we've done the science, and I'll show you in just a few minutes what I mean by the science, to say that our nickel is in sulfides. And we know that others have done the science and they don't mention their nickel and sulfides because they don't want to be telling people that 40, 50, or 60% of their nickel is tied up in silicates, which makes it almost impossible to produce a product of value. It certainly wouldn't be producing a class 1 nickel. So, you know, you're looking at recoveries in a sulfide of things like Raglan, etc. Their recoveries are pushing 90 to 95%. In silicates, recoveries are pushing 40 to 60%. So the same volume of rock is far more valuable in a sulfide than in silicates. Anyways, I digress. I wanted to talk about what that leads us to, and that is going from the known to the unknown. So when I show you the map and I talk about the known, well, that's what we're working on right now, the VTEM. But where we're going is the unknown. And everything about that is telling me there is an opportunity here for something that could rival some of the best mines in Canada that are in nickel. And I hope that we can find that. I'll just flip a page here. Obviously, disclaimer, everyone needs to read it. And I've talked about what we are at Quebec Nickel. I mean, we're a Quebec-based company and we're nickel. So Q, and the elemental sign for nickel is Ni, QNI. We think we're uniquely located in the Abitibi because we cannot find anything analogous to what we have. There are deposits that have nickel, no copper, no platinum, palladium. There's deposits that have copper, but no cobalt and no gold. We have all 6: platinum, palladium, gold for the precious metals, cobalt with the nickel, and then copper. So, and now I've talked about the expertise. So why do people walk over a nickel outcrop on their way to a gold outcrop? Because they have experience finding gold. They don't have experience finding nickel. So just to build a nickel team started with, it starts with the board of directors and the management. I look at Gary DeShooter as one of our most important hires. Gary worked for years with Falconbridge. I met him when he was working for Anglo American, looking for nickel worldwide for them. He had moved on to lactazile, which is a magmatic sulfide that produced a what would be considered a high-grade platinum palladium deposit. To bring people at the top, changed over the entire board of directors, myself being still on the board, but changed over the whole board of directors, bringing on Christine Pesch, Richard Dufresne, and you can see from their background, they've got decades of experience working for Falconbridge and working for Anglo American or for other mining companies. And then on the advisory board is David Gower and Glenn Mullen. And of everyone on there, Glenn Mullen he made a discovery in northern Quebec and saw that discovery in nickel all the way through to a nickel mine that eventually got taken over by the Chinese. David Gower, I've said, he was the general manager of nickel exploration worldwide for Falconbridge. I left Falconbridge when they merged with Xstrata. His team had more discoveries and brownfields as well as greenfields than any other team, I think, in Falconbridge history. He certainly made a number of discoveries at both Raglan and at Sudbury for Falconbridge before he went on to run his own business. Now, Dave and I have been on the board of directors together on a number of companies, and I know what value his advice is to the board. Okay, I've talked about myself being in this business for over 35 years. I've been involved in a number of nickel companies. David Gower has been involved in 2 of those with me, and so I may not be a geologist, but I've been around nickel geologists for half my life. Mm-hmm. Here's the Abitibi, and here's why this is not your daddy's Abitibi. You can see they are our little yellow outline there within the Abitibi, something like 600 kilometers east-west, 150, 200 kilometers on the north-south axis. There's the major mining cities that are shown up on here. And then we've also put nickel occurrences. And the only analog I see to us is a deposit called Grasset. And Grasset is owned by a company called Archer. And there are 5 million tons, I believe, if I remember their 43101 correctly, of around 1.3% nickel equivalent from surface down to about 450 meters. The people at Archer obviously feel that this is something that is economic, and they're doing everything in their power to bring this forward. We look at it as being, okay, if they down to 450 meters, 1% a nickel equivalent is economic. We're finding nickel at surface. Use the same an analog to what we can look to target. But our property isn't just the Fort Sill. It's also 150 square kilometers large.
In 2022, Quebec Nickel got a lot of work done specifically at the Fort Sill target. Could you run us through your 2022 work program and where that has led your focus in 2023?
This shows the 3 areas: Fort Ducros Ultramafic Complex and the Ducros Gabbro. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but over on the west side of the road is the Ducros, what we call the Ducros Gabbro and the Ultramafic Complex. On the east side is the Fort. And when I say it's 200 meters off the road, it's hard to show that little star any closer without blurring out the roadway. That's the road from Matagami up through the property to a place called Quévillon. To our immediate northwest, there's a railway and a power line. So again, access to infrastructure. The work program that we had focused on the drilling, mainly at the Fort Sill, has produced some pretty significant results comparable to anyone else in the Abitibi. And that 22,000 meters of drilling that we've done, we've announced about 11,000 meters of results. So say arm waving about another 10,000 meters as we're waiting from the lab. But where is that pointing us? So from the known to the unknown is what I said earlier. Geophysics is what we're able to do. Very little outcrop other than the Fortan. And here's the geophysics. So the last map that we're looking at, that was the geology map. There was a big brown splotch, looked like a target, that we call the Ducros gabbro. And now you can see that in the geophysics that we've done. This is a completely unexplored area. It's, call it 25 square kilometers. And we find no evidence that there's been any exploration ever done in this area. As well as on the Ducros ultramafic, there's just no evidence that people have filed with the Quebec government any work that they've done. You can see from the geophysics that the ultramafic swarm and the Ducros gabbro are just screaming targets. These are, ultramafic rocks. These are the kind of rocks you'll find nickel deposits in. The mafic also. And these rocks, they came up through these deep-seated faults that run across the property. They came up under incredible temperature and pressure from about 500 kilometers deep in the earth. And they just punched up through what we call the country rock, which in this case is sulfur-bearing volcanics and sediments. And you can see in the core that we have on the Fortan, you can see where it's actually melted the country rock, and there's little pieces of it floating in the drill core. And you can see that it's just blasted through. We believe that the same process has happened on the west side. So we want to, what we've learned here at the Fortan, we want to apply over on the Ducros ultramafic swarm and then the Ducros gabbro. And that is an incredible target. And anywhere along that keel that you see the purple to the bright red, anywhere along there could be hiding a deposit. And, is it 10 million tons? Is it 5 million tons? Is it close to surface or deeper? That's what we're going to go find out. And we're going to start right now. We have we've signed a drill contract. We're going to be bringing on 2 drills to the property. We want to be right now building the roadways to these various areas that we've targeted. We have a lot of drill permits, so we've permitted a lot of meters. And the idea is that we want to go over there and start drilling and do somewhere between 10 and 20,000 meters of drilling over on the west side. That will be our focus through the winter. It's a swamp. Temperatures in the area right now are -10 Celsius, dropping to -20. This is the kind of weather you need to freeze over the swamp. We'll be able to just drive in on roads that we're clearing right now, make these ice roads directly to where we want to be doing our drilling. And then we're going to want to be out of this area by no later than late April, and it may be as early as late March. You just never know about the weather in this area. So we're pretty confident that we can get in there, get to work. We want to work at it hard because we know we've got a lot of work to do in a very short window. And then we bring back to the Fortan. And in the Fortan, we want to keep developing what we have here and continue what we've been calling our continuity drilling. What do people know about nickel and how the deposits are formed? And it's nickel. There's not a lot of nickel geologists. There's even fewer nickel analysts out there that can tell you what's going on and understand nickel. And nickel requires a number of ingredients. So if you think about baking a cake, you need all of these ingredients. So what do we have that we see in the gabbro and the ultramafic? We see the sulfur-bearing rock. So the the sediments and the volcanics. These are the kind of rocks you need where the magma comes up, melts the rock, it digests this under incredible temperature and pressure. It breaks the bond between the nickel and the silica, and it replaces that bond with iron and sulfur in the very simplest terms. This is what we're looking for in baking this cake. But what else has to happen? Well, the rock that's intruding has to be carrying nickel. I mean, you're not obviously you're not going to get a nickel deposit if the rock doesn't have a nickel tenor. Well, we know from the work we've done at VTEM, we have extremely high nickel tenor in the rocks that we have. So part of this baking the cake is you have the oven set at the right temperature. You have the magma flowing into the pot at the right pressure and temperature. It melts all the ingredients. It then cools. As it cools, it precipitates out. So if you imagine a teacup and you put sugar in and then you let that teacup settle, the sugar will actually, as the water cools, the sugar will accumulate at the bottom of the teacup. That's a very good analogy to how nickel deposits form. Nickel is heavy, the copper is heavy. As it cools, it slowly drifts to the bottom of the chamber. And then in the Abitibi, everything gets turned up on its side. So this is 2.8 billion years of tectonic forces at work. They've twisted and turned and split. There's faulting. It allows these deep-seated structures to be able to provide for that fluid to come up and start forming this cake. This is what we're looking for. The icing on the cake, to continue in the analogy, is where we plan on poking these first couple of holes. We believe that we'll find what we hope is a nickel-bearing sulfide that'll lead us to a deposit. And the reason we know on this side that we have nickel-bearing is because the work that we've done on soils, on some of the other geochemistry, is showing that pretty much everything we're looking at here is nickeliferous. The soils that we did, really, they pointed the direction to the keel. And this is that purple blob right at the bottom of the gabbro. And this is a very exciting area for us to be looking.
And before we go, are there any more slides you'd like to take us through?
Go look at our website for the results. These are all spectacular results. There's the 410 that I was standing on. You can see the results that we had from it. Amazing that this is 200 meters off a roadway. These are the things that we get to see where I can confidently say our nickel is in pentlandite, a nickel sulfide. You can see the pink, it stands out. We do not see any nickel and silicates here. So we feel confident that our nickel is going to be 100% sulfides. You can, again, more science. All of this is required for where we see these next steps for the company. But you can see the pentlandite grains. So when you grind this up, let's say we have a deposit, imagine that, and you're grinding this up and you're floating off what you call the nickel sulfides. With the nickel sulfides goes the cobalt. So you would send to a nickel smelter cobalt and nickel. To a copper smelter, and this is the interesting thing on the slide on the picture above, you see the copper. And that copper, what would they call it, report to the copper con, is all the platinum, palladium, and gold. So to a smelter, you're going to be sending two high value products. And I think that's probably a good place to stop. Obviously we always think about our community. We have so many stakeholders in the community, First Nations, hunters, those people that live in the area, institutional investors, and the government. So support from all of them.
Well, we sincerely appreciate your time today, David. Thank you so much for coming on and giving us an intro to Quebec Nickel.
Megan, it was my pleasure. I really appreciate it. I look forward to the next time we can talk.
Yes, we'll be sure to have you on again in the near term and wish you the best on the start of your exploration in 2023.
Thank you, Megan.